Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. It's time for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Poultry houses have some Wicomico County residents up in arms. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. It all started not too long ago when a proposal for 13 chicken houses near Naylor Mill Road came to light. But local residents began organizing. Environmentalists took notice of poultry operations far larger than anything the peninsula has seen in the past. And they appear to be a growing trend. In early March, word came of another plan for 8-house poultry complex near Hebron. The plan for Salisbury has been scaled back to 10 houses and has the Wicomico County Council searching for new regulations on such large operations. Questions are being raised about these large poultry houses by the Wicomico Environmental Trust and the local NAACP. Also, a group called Concerned Citizens Against Industrial CAFOs has been formed. CAFO stands for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation. We want to talk this morning about where the situation stands for local residents who raise questions about these new chicken houses. And in our studio is Barry Johansson. He's Executive Director of the Wicomico Environmental Trust. And welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, well, first of all, what do you make of the fact that the county council, at least in effect, has decided it's not going to place a moratorium on these houses, so we could see more. We obviously have the proposal for Hebron, and the stance that the county council overall has taken.
Well, you know, I appreciate that there have been efforts on the county council's part to look at regulation of these houses and to establish stricter guidelines for how they would be set up. I'm not very pleased at all with the fact that, you know, these houses will be growing, you know, in numbers that we never anticipated, and in size, and the effects that might have on our community as a whole. This is really a community issue. It's not environmentalists versus agriculture. In fact, you know, Wicomico Environmental Trust takes the stance of we try to find common ground and be friends first. But there are issues that we called publicly for a moratorium. The part of your question about how we feel about that is not very good because there are so many that are applicants that are lining up or already in the pipeline that is going to forever change the landscape of our community if it's not more regulated.
Do you think that we could see a flood of these things before the county council acts in terms of applications and getting their process forward? I know, for instance, the one that I just mentioned with the 10 chicken houses, there's some question about whether or not that could be stopped because the application process has already begun and going forward. You're
talking about the Naylor Mill West
right.
Road complex. Yeah, the rumors about that just fly. I mean, as recently as yesterday, I heard that the applicant in that case may be withdrawing from the project. But, you know, I heard that a month ago, and then I heard it was 13 houses and then 10 houses, and it's hard to get to the bottom of it. And I think that's just the nature of how things work. But it is a concern.
So what do you make of the testimony that we heard from the state? I was struck, by the way, by Gary Kelman. I guess he oversees the Maryland Department of Environment's Animal Feeding Operation Program. And he said, quote, "We feel zero pollution is what is tolerable. That's what our permit, if properly followed, is designed to assure." In essence, he's saying, if everything is followed by the book, you shouldn't have pollution. You reassured?
Not at all.
Why not?
The issue was that this forum, you know, was not diverse enough with input. There weren't any scientists. Everyone was part of the Hogan administration, and the Hogan administration had in fact talked about wanting to fast track the process for permitting CAFOs, and you know. I actually had asked a question, one of the written questions that went in, and it had to do with fast track. And the question said that given that the Hogan administration wants to fast track these efforts, don't you think, and this was addressed to the forum, don't you think that there would be a benefit of having outside research presented? And there's a lot of that available. And the 4 people responded to that from the forum, and everyone talked about the trying to defend the fast track statement, and that's not what it really means. However, no one answered about the request for more research and more people brought to the table to look at this.
Now, are you concerned at all about the health impacts of these large operations? Because I got the impression that was not something that necessarily the state would be looking at, or certainly the county would be looking at.
Very concerned. That's a good part of the public research. In fact, I had requested a meeting for myself and the president of the board of WET to meet with our county health officer, and we were refused an opportunity to meet with her. I think that there are still unanswered questions. I hear the words of the state people and some of the county people that there's been no connection drawn between poultry workers and asthma and other diseases that might be affected negatively by the particulates. However, we know that children are much more likely to be affected, and that's a big concern. And the distance between the homes and these CAFOs is not significantly better even with the new legislation. I mean, it's the proposed legislation. I mean,
right.
I think that the density issue has to be talked about in terms of how many houses, a limit on the houses, and where they can be located in the county.
How much, by the way, is this an issue of location in terms of nearby developments? I mean, a large operation, for instance, be acceptable if it were like far beyond, for instance, say the Salisbury area?
Well, I think in the efforts and the good efforts that were made by our planning and zoning department to talk about designated growth areas and the way they would increase, there would be a special exception process that people needed to apply for in order to build nearer communities. I mean, that's a step in the right direction. But also, if you read the proposed changes, it talks about protecting homes that are in residential developments of 10 or more subdivisions. What about the individual homeowner that might have a house in Parsonsburg or Willards, and a CAFO could be built right on top of them? What does that say about our the way we value the quality of life of all of our residents?
By the way, do you make a distinction here between what we have talk about these sort of large operations with 10, sometimes more houses, and say the smaller houses, maybe a couple of houses, for instance? Because I know, for instance, I remember looking at a proposed development right near Hebron, as a matter of fact, and at the time, anyway, they were talking about this, and I noticed that nearby there were a couple of chicken houses that were nearby. I kind of wondered what kind of impact it would have on, say, community development, which is something in the neighborhood of like 1,600 units, I think, at the time. How much are smaller units more acceptable near, say, for instance, development as opposed to, say, these large units?
Well, it would be more acceptable. I mean, one of our concerns at Wicomico Environmental Trust, as WET as we call it, is that we are friendly to smaller farmers, and the industry is changing rapidly, for animal production, not just chickens in this country. And what's going to happen to the smaller farmers? And will they? There have been concerns raised by that group themselves about will they be forced out of the business? And what does that do to our economy? What does that do to local families when companies that are bought by out-of-state interests, come in or out of county interest come in and develop here because of our very lenient, currently lenient zoning regulations for CAFOs.
So one of the things that we're talking about the health and environmental restrictions, and my understanding is that Council President John Cannon said that the county's hands are tied when it comes to imposing health and environmental restrictions because state and federal rules keep them from being more stringent. Is that a legitimate position in your view?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I know Mr. Cannon. I think Mr. Cannon's an attorney. But I've been told that the county is limited in what they can do by people who are, kind of side on the side of environmental concerns. My concern is, well, what leverage do we have? And I do know that there's a county water resource element which talks about protection of the Paleo Channel, and I don't know what effort has been made to consider that. I know that the experts on the panel from the state of Maryland felt that there was no real concern. My problem with a lot of that forum when we heard from those people was the word "if." We heard it so many times. If everything is done properly, there won't be environmental damage caused to the air, to the Paleo Channel, to groundwater. But if's a big word, and then the question was asked, well, how often and how are these sites monitored? And it said once every 5 years, and they're announced. I just don't think we can take that chance when we're talking about our water supply, our air, and our rivers in the bay.
I noticed, by the way, that there was one add onto that, which was that I would think one of the department had said that they relied upon complaints, that local input, that so that there's, yes, you have a 5-year gap, but you rely upon people to come in and to tell you what's going on. I assume because there are just so many facilities.
Yeah, I don't know their rationale for that, but I do think that the issue of much more regular monitoring. I don't know if local citizens would be able to file a complaint when the water supply may be slowly being contaminated. How would someone know to file a complaint? I think the state needs to take more responsibility. And one of the questions we have is how do we have input to state decisions, and how can we ask them to consider what's going to happen in our county? It seems to be thrown up as we're helpless here, and I don't think citizens should be helpless.
Now, I want to turn to some of the proposed new regulations, just go through some of them here. Apparently, some new proposed regulations would include things like minimum 200-foot setback from all property lines, including roads, setbacks of 400 feet from existing houses not on farm properties, from schools, churches, daycare centers, etc., 500-foot setback in the designated growth areas if the fans and the chicken houses are face away, 600 if they face toward the other buildings, the nearby buildings. Also, they talk about buffers, 3 rows of buffer plantings. For designated areas, it would be 5. What do you make of those in terms of trying to at least push some distance between these large operations and the nearby folks and nearby neighbors?
It's an improvement over current regulations. Is it sufficient? I don't know. I mean, we haven't seen the operation of these kind of plants over time. These large industrial chicken factories, actually, growing factories. So we don't know if they'll be sufficient. I would doubt it. I think that's one of the reasons why we do call for a moratorium, because we'd like more research to be considered before there's such a huge influx, which is going to change our landscape.
By the way, what do you make of how the response has been at the county level in terms of the county council on the one hand is looking at, for instance, these regulations. The county executive, Bob Culver, at least initially, was not really sure that we needed any regulations at all. Obviously, he organized this particular forum. There seems to be some divisions. How do you read the divisions that are taking place inside the county? Because it does seem to be some kind of mixed reaction to this.
Yeah, there's a mixed reaction, and it's difficult to point to people's motives, but I think there are forces in our country and as well as in our county where growth is the target, regardless of the consequences. And I think some on our county council believe that the economic health of the county may veto, and especially the chicken industry, because they're such a big part and such an important part of our community. WET, is grateful that the chicken industry is here, but we really don't know where this is all going, and that's why we call for more independent study.
But do you, by the way, get any sense about where the poultry industry is in all of this?
Well, I think, seems to be some difference between the different integrators for poultry houses. I think some of them, and I'm not going to get into naming names here, have said they really aren't so much in favor of the large homes, the CAFOs. Others are can't wait to sign contracts. And my guess is if the industry standard is changing, that all of the integrators will kind of be in a position where they'll have to follow that directive, because it will be probably the least expensive way to produce chicken for the country. And chicken is by far the best and least expensive way for consumers to get their protein. And if you look at the prices of other protein fish and beef and pork, they've gone up considerably while chicken has stayed down. So I think it's it's a good question.
Because I was wondering whether or not we're going to see more of these, just particularly for the Delmarva Peninsula, because I know there's an efforts to expand the market for instance, in Russia and Asia and so on. So it seems as if there is a driving force at least to produce more chickens then, at least, obviously across the country, but here, yeah.
I think we're in an area of rumors again. There's a. I'd heard that the poultry produced on the Eastern Shore will be marketed primarily to Asia. I don't have any way to know whether that's true or not. One of the issues that we have too is that when you look at the meetings and correspondence between county council and everything, the chicken industry is always included, and there's a concern that environmentalists, responsible environmentalists, are not invited to the table.
Why do you think that is?
I think that this is a pretty pro-growth group we have on the county council overall, and I think that they want to trust the industry to do the right thing.
So one of the questions that was asked, by the way, at the forum, which struck me because it may perhaps a bit silence, but I think it was Greg Bassett who was moderating, and he raised a question that was obviously from the audience, the question about how many chickens can we actually sustain here on the peninsula. And he noted, for instance, in Somerset County, I think there was supposed to be 1 million raised and so on, and we see this thing increasing. And the response from the state officials was that essentially, as I recall, is they didn't know, or there wasn't clear. Do you have any sense about whether anybody's attempted to deal with that question at all?
No, I don't. I haven't really come across anything in the literature or in blogs and things like that I look at. But I think that the fact that we have a real problem with phosphates and nitrates tells us that we better clean up our how agriculture and how everyone else, whether it be from runoff in our yards or the way grass is fertilized, we better pay attention. And to bring in the number of chickens, I mean, the size of the houses tells a lot. They're more than the new CAFOs are I think 60 by 600 feet, and so that's 3,600 square feet. That can accommodate a lot of birds. And the old standard was more like 16,000 square feet. So it's it's an unanswered question. The other unanswered question had been how much water really is in the Paleo Channel and our other aquifers, and that wasn't really addressed either, except that it was a very healthy aquifer, and that's what that's the primary thing that we want to protect.
Now, as to be fair, I think it's the Delmarva Poultry Industry, a trade group, has said, in essence, that there's actually been a decline in recent years of chicken houses because of the chicken market, and that only now is it coming back, and that the construction, particularly these houses, are basically replacing a lot of the old houses that got lost. What's your sense about that? Your reaction to that? I think it was Bill Satterfield I remember hearing addressing the county council at one point and saying that.
Yeah, well, that's an industry stand. I think we might agree to disagree about that.
Okay. So one of the other interesting things the minutes we have left is that traditionally there has been this conflict between the environmental community on the one hand and, say, the agricultural community on the other, or between the agriculture community on this hand and some folks in the Western Shore, and particularly out of the cities, particularly in the state legislature. This is a new development as far as I can tell. I mean, the Daily Times, I think, described it as sort of the backyard backlash. That there is this, that these are not, a lot of the folks who are raising questions are not traditional environmentalists, are not people who traditionally might be necessarily overcritical of the poultry industry, but these are people like local residents and obviously, in the end, local voters.
Absolutely, and people. I mean, I personally lived in Willards for the first 9 years. I lived on the shore, and I remember going outside, and I lived in the country on a dirt lane, and it was a beautiful spot 90% of the days. 10% of the days I go outside, and there were just small chicken houses then, and my eyes would water because the wind was blowing the ammonia right towards us. So I think people are very concerned, and you don't have to be, I think environmentalists get a bad rap for calling attention to these things, but when people are affected directly, when their neighborhoods are threatened, or that's when they want to join the fray.
Do you think that this could create a political backlash? I mean, these are voters. These are not just people from the outside or people from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation or other folks. These are like the local folks who may be very conservative and maybe even very Republican.
That's right, and this is a community which tends to be more conservative, but I think the time will tell about that, because as people see what's happened here and in other parts of the country, talk about Flint, Michigan, with their issues and things that have been approved by the EPA and local governments. Also in California, there are just numerous examples of abuses or not looking into matters far enough to really make a good decision. It's just like, well, we need it. I've heard county council people say, whatever, we need more houses, and that may be true, but let's do it in a way that's let's not rush. Let's make sure we do our homework before we make some kind of mistaken calculations that's going to affect us and certainly our children and grandchildren.
By the way, do you think that the people who, at least some of the people who have been investing in these large houses, for instance, the one we're talking about here with Naylor Mill Road, that they're actually folks who don't live here? They live, I think, in Virginia. They came to this country and they said, okay, this looks like a great spot. And there are other people who are going to invest from outside. Do you think they just didn't realize what they might be getting themselves into in terms of this pushback? Because you mentioned a moment ago, there's some rumor now that perhaps they may withdraw their application.
Well, it's, I think there's a reason why people in Virginia are looking at Delmarva Peninsula. And one of the reasons is that the Virginia regulations regarding these houses are not as liberal as Wicomico County and even Worcester counties. And certainly, even with the changes in Somerset County, there had been some discussion among people about, can we just adopt the Virginia standards, and that would make this more palatable. But I don't. And in fact, I think when Mr. Lennox was talking to the county council a few days back, I mean, he talked about modeling some of the language after Virginia, but there was some pushback from some of the county council members who felt that was too restrictive.
Would that be more acceptable to you, or would that be acceptable to you? Or are you unsure?
I'm still on a kick for
Okay.
for let's have a moratorium and then worry about the get the facts, invite more people, including I've got studies from the Center for Disease Control which say that there are issues regarding health. Let's get those questions answered first, and then think about zoning. But it's good that the county's doing that, and I appreciate the efforts of the Planning and Zoning Office and the county to listen.
Are you optimistic that, obviously you didn't get your moratorium, but that you'll have some kind of influence, that maybe they might get around to some of the concerns? Or?
Well, I hope the moratorium issue isn't dead. I suspect it may be, but I certainly think it's calling attention to the issue in a way where we can make more reasonable effort to protect our citizens, which, after all, is the job of our local government.
We've been speaking with Barry Johansson. He's Executive Director of the Wicomico Environmental Trust, talking about the development of large chicken houses here in Wicomico County, and no doubt this is an issue which will continue for some time. I appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. We appreciate it.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, view the daily times, or visit pac14.org.